Hello and welcome! Today we're diving into a really fascinating piece of Indian law that, you could say, puts a time limit on justice itself. It's basically a legal stopwatch, and it affects almost every single civil dispute.
Just think about that for a second. Could some old debt you've forgotten about, or maybe a business mistake from 20 years ago, suddenly pop up and haunt you in court? It's the kind of thought that can definitely keep you up at night. Well, the good news is the answer is generally no. And that's exactly why the Limitation Act of 1963 exists. Its whole purpose is to stop that endless threat of a lawsuit, to make sure disputes have a final end date, and to give everyone involved some peace of mind. So, how does this legal stopwatch really work? Well, here's our game plan. We're going to start with its core function. Then we'll get into the really clever way it protects both people in a dispute. We'll look at how the clock can be paused, what happens if you still miss the deadline, and finally, we'll see how a judge actually makes the call. Okay, let's jump right in with that first point. Why on earth would you put a time limit on justice in the first place? It seems a bit strange, right?
So the first thing you have to get your head around is this huge split between criminal and civil law. You see, in criminal law, the state can often chase a suspect forever. But for civil cases, disputes about money, property, contracts, the Limitation Act starts a clock ticking. And there's a really good reason for this. As time goes on, evidence vanishes, papers get lost, people's memories get fuzzy. The law knows that a fair trial just becomes impossible after a while. So if you don't file your case in time, you lose your shot. And this is where we get to the really smart part of this act. It's not just some blunt deadline. It's actually designed to make the fight fair by giving both sides, the person suing and the one being sued, their own special kind of protection. Think of it like this. The person being sued, that's the defendant, gets a shield. That shield is called the schedule of the act. It's just a big list of deadlines for every type of case, and it basically says, hey, you can't live in fear forever. But on the other side, the person who is suing, the plaintiff, gets a lifeline. And that lifeline comes from the sections of the act. These are a bunch of rules that can stretch those deadlines, making sure a person doesn't lose their right to justice because of some unfair little detail.
All right, so that brings us to a really important term, the period of limitation. This is the default time on the stopwatch. It's the standard, out-of-the-box deadline that you find right in that schedule we just talked about. For example, if you're trying to recover a debt, you typically get 3 years. That's your period of limitation. But, and this is a huge but, that's not always the real deadline. And that's where our second key term comes in, the prescribed period. This is the one that actually matters. It starts with that basic period of limitation, but then the court adds any legally required pauses or timeouts. This becomes your final adjusted deadline. So you're probably wondering, how does that standard deadline get stretched into the actual deadline? Well, the first way is through what are called exclusions. Just think of them as mandatory timeouts that no one can argue with. These exclusions are found in sections 12 to 24 of the Act, and they are totally automatic. The court has zero choice in the matter. If there's a delay that isn't the plaintiff's fault, that time has to be added to the clock. The classic example is when you're waiting for the court to give you the official papers you need to file an appeal. Let's make this super simple. Imagine you lose a case, and the law says you have 30 days to appeal. That's your period of limitation. The clock has officially started. But wait. To file that appeal, you need a certified copy of the judgment. Let's say the court itself takes 10 days to get you those papers. Now, that delay has nothing to do with you, right? Well, here's the magic. Those 10 days are excluded. They don't count against you. The court is legally forced to add them to your time. So your original 30 days, plus that 10-day delay, means your new actual deadline, your prescribed period, is now 40 days. Okay, that's the automatic stuff. But what if you miss even that extended 40-day deadline? I mean, what if something truly catastrophic happens? That's where a totally different idea called exceptions comes into the picture. Now, this right here is probably the most important difference to get. Exclusions are a right. They are something the court must do before the final deadline is even set. But exceptions, they're a plea for mercy after you've already missed the deadline. The court may grant them, but it absolutely doesn't have to. It's all up to the judge. And to get one of these exceptions, you have to prove you had a sufficient cause for being late. And we're not talking about small excuses here. This is for things like, say, you were in a terrible car crash and were hospitalized on the very last day you could file. The burden of proof is completely on you to convince the judge that your reason is good enough. So, with all these different pieces, deadlines, adjustments, exclusions, exceptions, how does a court even begin to sort it all out? Well, they don't just guess. They follow a super clear 4-step checklist for every single case that comes before them.
This is the court's playbook. Step 1, what's this fight even about? Step 2, okay, when did this whole problem actually start? Step 3, they go look up the standard deadline in the Act's big list, the schedule. And finally, step 4, they do the math, adding in any of those mandatory exclusions to figure out the final actual deadline, the prescribed period.
And after that 4-step check is done, the rule is, honestly, pretty brutal. As Section 3 of the Act says, if your case is filed even one single day after that final prescribed period, it shall be dismissed. That's it. Game over. Unless, of course, you manage to convince the court to grant you one of those very rare exceptions. So when you kind of zoom out and look at the whole picture, you realize this isn't just a bunch of dry rules and dates. It's about performing a really delicate balancing act that goes to the very heart of what a justice system is supposed to do.
See, the whole point of the Limitation Act is to find a fair balance. On one side, you have to protect a person's right to go to court and get justice. But on the other side, you have to protect another person's right to eventually have peace and not live in fear of a lawsuit from 30 years ago. And mixed into all of that is society's need for disputes to just end, to have some finality. So, at the end of the day, this act is so much more than a calendar. It's a really sophisticated system with shields and lifelines, with mandatory math and moments of mercy, all designed to make sure that the passing of time actually helps create fairness instead of destroying it. And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. This law tries to draw a clear line in the sand, but it's a constant struggle for any legal system. At what point does letting one person keep searching for justice become fundamentally unfair to somebody else? It's the core puzzle that this legal stopwatch tries to solve every single day. Thanks for joining me.